We're excited to present to you a great team assembled to speak to you about this cutting edge new technology innovation in the capital markets, warrant exercise portals. We're going to give you some thoughts on where the market is going to take them and how this is going to impact warrants in general. So first, let me introduce to you Damian Lopez. Damian is a corporate securities lawyer who has worked with various Canadian and US publicly listed companies in the technology, resources, and cannabis industries. He has over 10 years of experience working in Latin America, including corporate finance, mergers and acquisitions, and go public transactions. He is VP Legal and Corporate Strategy at Flora Growth, who recently launched a warrant exercise portal. So he'll be telling you a little bit about that experience today. The other person speaking to you today is Rebecca DiStefano. She is a capital markets attorney at Greenberg Traurig, focused on US cross-border capital markets, securities regulation, corporate finance, and she also serves on the firm's blockchain task force. She counsels public and private companies in financing activities, including Reg D, private placements, Reg A, Reg CF, continuous disclosure requirements, and corporate governance. She spends a lot of time helping private companies transition to going public, and she has an excellent understanding and relationship with the SEC and FINRA requirements. So Damian, Rebecca, thank you both for being here today to share your insights on this innovative new functionality that we're seeing take over the capital markets, which is warrant exercise portals. Rebecca, maybe I'll start with you and ask you to share with our audience today, what are some tips and tricks that issuers should be aware of if they're contemplating setting up a warrant exercise portal?
Sure. Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's really good to be here with you today. Thank you for the invitation, and just good to be here with DealMaker and with Flora and Damian. So it's such a great topic, and I was so excited when you presented this topic to me because warrants are just incredibly helpful accoutrements and enhancements in Regulation A financings, as they have been historically in Reg D offerings in the United States. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that they've been on the radar recently in SPAC transactions related to how warrants are accounted for in the company's financial statements, whether as equity or as a derivative liability. So not to digress on that, I just wanted to say that warrants are, they're an instrument that is typically misunderstood sometimes, and sometimes they don't achieve the intended results if they include the wrong features. So management needs to spend some time, and we spend a lot of time counseling our clients to spend time on that. There's not a universal form for a warrant instrument. So Rebecca and Damian, jump in if I'm being too long-winded, or if you have a question of me. For today's discussion, I just wanted to say that think of warrants as being in two buckets, as compensation warrants and as capital raise warrants. For today, we're talking about them as financing tools, in conjunction with this electronic warrant portal.
Yeah, that's a great point. Great point to make that distinction.
Yeah, so compensation. So just talking about just for a moment about the two buckets. The founders often get warrants in the early stages of the financing of the company. That could be for sweat equity, and also it's used as a tool for compensation for broker dealers, investment bankers. Early stage angels, we know they love warrants. Retail investors, they love warrants. And warrants are something that really get investors engaged in the sales process. And they're, just highly prized by investors. So the investor receives, why is this? The investor receives another participation opportunity in the company if the company performs well. But there's not a big downside, because to the investor, they're not committing additional capital until they want to, and they see that the company's performing. So it's a great tool. However, warrants expire, and many people forget about the expiration date. They may forget they have the warrants altogether. So they may get a piece of paper. Things are done electronically now, but in the old days, they got a piece of paper, they got a warrant instrument on special paper, But even if the company remembers that the warrants are out there, it's not necessarily under any obligation to tell the warrant holders, hey, here are your key dates. Now it's a very different situation when you want your warrant holders to exercise, as here we're talking about capital formation events. So as I mentioned, the face of the warrant instrument document says what the key dates are. But many investors, with a lot going on, have a lot of warrants in their portfolio, and they forget that they have the warrants in the deal, let alone which round the warrants are associated with, when those warrants expire, when there's a redemption, should they have gotten a redemption notice. And so the portal exercise here that we're talking about is, very helpful to the company and in this situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Damian, maybe you want to jump in because you have a lot of experience in the capital markets. What caused you to want to try a warrant portal?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, thanks for having me on. It's great to catch up with Rebecca DiStefano, who I've worked closely with on the Flora IPO, and Rebecca Kacaba. We're working together on the Flora warrant portal. So thanks for that. We had a successful Reg A offering, and what came along with that is that we had 10,000 investors. So traditionally, if you had a smaller finance, you have a smaller amount of warrants, and you might choose to do it in-house. But we quickly realized with 10,000 warrant holders, we would have to hire a team of 100 people to be able to process that kind of paper. And so we had to find a solution, and that's where the warrant portal came in. And it allows us to efficiently and quickly process warrant exercises when they do come in. It allows us to reach out to our investors to remind them of expiry dates, because it is true, many investors forget they have a warrant, forget what their expiry date is. And so it allowed us to efficiently maneuver through this process that traditionally is quite cumbersome.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. And great. How's your experience been so far on this one? Because I know you have a lot of experience with other issuers as well. Are you able to tell how the exercises are going and compare, the capital in?
Yeah, for sure. So we're fairly early in our experience using the warrant portal, but we've had great success to date. I think at least $2 or $3 million have been exercised, which, given the size and the length of our warrant term, it shows that people are eager to exercise their warrants if they're given a path to do it. Many people, like in the traditional way, many people would wait to the absolute last day, partly because they lost their warrants, they didn't know when they were exercising or when they were expiring. And it was kind of a challenge to even exercise, because you'd have to fill out complicated forms, you'd have to go to the bank and send a wire. And so what the portal has allowed is for people to go on a website that they trust, that they're familiar with, that is streamlined for their use, and quickly fill it out and then fund their warrant exercise. So they're skipping a lot of the steps that normally you'd have to go through, and that's allowing for more exercises and more capital coming into the company.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to me that that's fundamentally changing for me how I view warrants in general. I've been practicing for a long time, and I typically saw warrants as a sweetener or a drag on the cap table for an issuer. I got asked to issue my warrants myself in DealMaker, and I always said no, because I didn't want that dilution when I couldn't rely on the dollars coming into the company. And yet now, seeing it as a really solid financing mechanism is totally changing my perspective on warrants.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think a lot of the investment banks that we've been working with, consultants, advisors, are seeing it more that way as well. And in the conversations that we've had, it's been a value add, because they see this source of capital that we can tap into fairly easily. And so I think the more that warrant portals are used efficiently, and if you price your warrants correctly, I think it can be quite a tool as opposed to a drag on your cap table.
Oh, that's really interesting. So they're actually seeing it as an asset that the company has that they can tap into.
That's right.
Wow. So that's a material change for me. Rebecca, I mean, you've been involved in Reg A for a long time. Historically, Reg A has gone through a number of twists and turns. It started, issuers used it, the go publics didn't work out that well. Any trends that come to mind as we're talking about warrant portals that you have seen that did work or didn't work out?
So just going back historically, without getting too deep in the history of Reg A Plus, warrant portals, not even a thing until recently. Reg A Plus has been around since 1936. It's been generally, not Reg A Plus, Reg A has been around since 1936. Generally a little used and little known really in recent years, leading up to the Jobs Act of 2012, which expanded the Reg A usefulness by permitting, up to 50 million in capital raised during a continuous 12-month period and bifurcating the reg into two tiers. Tier 1, which is designed more for local capital formation. A lot of folks don't know that, but that was what it was actually designed to do. And then Tier 2, which is more the widely used exemption since the SEC has conducted its look back economic report. So, really more capital is being raised than's even being reported currently. And the SEC acknowledges that capital, we don't really know how much capital is being raised. The DERA, which is the economic arm of the SEC, has said, we don't have good reporting yet, that the issuer can report it in its annual report, but we don't know. So they know that there's a lag in reporting. So, what is currently really working right now, in terms of trends is the unit, or the two component offering with a share of equity plus an instrument that's exercisable into equity, which is warrants. So I think it's kind of making a comeback. We're seeing less and less of that in the Reg D world, and we're seeing more and more of that. So it seems to be working. What didn't, and this is a little away from warrants, but what didn't work out quite as planned was the NASDAQ listed Reg A Plus IPO, which was highly touted at the beginning of these reforms. In 2019, NASDAQ amended its rules and said, we're requiring a 2-year minimum operating history at the time of approval for these companies' initial listing application. So, many Reg A Plus issuers don't have the 2-year period under their belts. And so they would need to list in conjunction with a registered offering. Hopefully that will be remedied some, but what we are seeing is more and more mature companies are coming. And what I am seeing, Rebecca, in the warrant application is that, I've had a number of clients come and say, we want to do a warrant only offering, which I really haven't seen in a long time. And can we list our warrants? So that's something that's really quite different. We have a couple of clients contemplating that right now of a warrant offering and listing warrants themselves on NASDAQ. So more to follow on that. Yeah, so that's kind of the trend that I'm seeing that's a little bit different. And then not exactly related to the warrants, but during this very brief observation period that we've had since 2015, real estate has really driven empowered Reg A Plus quite a bit, but also the retail consumer facing businesses have really utilized Reg A Plus IPOs to have, to bring consumers to their offerings as shareholders. So it's been a way to convert new shareholders to the company as a customer, and vice versa. It's been a way to convert customers to shareholders by the same token.
Right, and Damian, that was kind of the Flora approach, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you want to use your investors as champions, as advocates for your business. And I think that's certainly what we were able to do and continue to do. I think they're a huge part of the Flora team. We have a constant dialogue with them. we're able to communicate effectively with them, and they're supporting us. And so I think that was another reason why, going back to the warrant portal and its benefits, is that it allows you to communicate with them quite easily. Whereas the more traditional way, whether you had a warrant indenture or you were managing your own register, it was much more difficult. It'd be more piecemeal, or you'd have to direct emails to individuals, and it just wasn't manageable. And so we've tried to do it in such a way that we continued our communication strategy, which was to engage with investors regularly from day one, from the day that they came onto our website as part of the Reg A, and we're continuing that as a public company and helping them facilitate their warrant exercises.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that's what I do with our investor base at DealMaker as well, and why we launched DM Engage, so that we can help facilitate that ongoing communication. But something Rebecca said reminded me of a conversation we had a long time ago. I was always concerned, so you guys are doing this retail Reg A offering. I was always concerned about how a retail investor could really understand the value of a warrant, and how, like, it's kind of a complex instrument, right? So is there any tips or tricks or ways that you found successful about communicating to a retail investor the value of a warrant, and how do you get them to exercise and understand this kind of complex process?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think a lot of sophisticated people don't truly understand what a warrant is, and what's the difference between a warrant and an option. Is a warrant traded? So there's tons of the devil's in the details, I guess. And so that was a challenge for us. And we had tons of investors. And so you can imagine the sorts of questions and the volume of questions that we were receiving. So we really tried to put on our educational hat, and in some of our communications, take that as an opportunity to teach them a little bit about how a warrant works. We had the benefit of being a public company, so I think the value of a warrant is easier to show when you're a public company and you have a trading price, because you compare it, you can compare it to the strike price, and it's easy to understand the value. A bit more of a challenge when you're still private, and it's difficult to understand maybe what the warrant is worth. But I think it was a very important part of the strategy to focus on the explanation, to teach exactly what it is and what the terms are, and we found that to be quite beneficial.
And how did you do that? Through emails or through the landing page website?
Both. Yeah, so we tried to have a clear and concise landing page with frequently asked questions, as well as our phone number and email should they have any questions. We could deal with investors one-on-one, but we also had email blasts that we sent out to remind them that they had warrants, what the terms were, when they were expiring, and so far so good.
Nice, good. So Damian, any other issuers besides Reg A issuers that you would see yourself using a warrant portal for in the future?
Yeah, for sure. The bulk of my experience prior to working with Flora was with public companies, and the majority of financings that I've been a part of had a warrant component. They were a unit offering, and we've handled those traditionally in 3 different ways. You would either, one would be that you would handle the warrant register in-house, and so that would be managed by your in-house legal team, your clerks, and that was okay if you only had a few investors. But once you got about 50 or 100, it's quite cumbersome, and it's a drain on your human resources, because then your team is just processing warrants as opposed to doing their other job. And the other way was to have your law firm do it, which again works fine. But again, if you have too many investors, it can be quite costly. And then the third was to use a third-party warrant agent under an indenture. So your transfer agent typically would do that. And that was okay. But again, if you had many investors that wanted communication in real time, or tons of questions, your transfer agent, their business is just not suited to that. And so I could see if you did a financing with many investors and they wanted to ask questions about the terms, it not being an efficient way to handle that kind of investor base. And so I do think that public companies, if they're going to do a financing and they're expecting quite a few investors, it would make serious sense to consider having a warrant portal, because it just streamlines everything. It makes things easier for international investors, because now they no longer have to courier their original signed document. They're not having to wire money from overseas to you. With the pandemic as well, having things be electronic has made things a lot easier, because people aren't as able to maybe access a printer or go to the bank. So I think there's a lot of value to be had for public companies looking to do a widely distributed offering.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense to me. I don't know if I've ever exercised warrants that I held on any deal. So just streamlining and facilitating it is a huge benefit for sure. Rebecca, a while back you had mentioned something to me about the 1A. Is there anything, if you want to set up a warrant portal, you need to think about in advance if you're doing a Reg A?
You know, I'm glad you asked, because I think that this is a huge opportunity to better explain the warrant exercise to the investor in the 1A disclosure. And so I'm just kind of thinking about this on the fly while we're talking about it now, but I think that this would be an add-in that I would really want to include in disclosure, that this is a way for the investor to get more information. You know, but again, as the SEC has recently said in its investor bulletin, you know, we have to be very mindful to explain exactly what the terms are. And so, you know, the points that I would make about the disclosure would be, one, you know, if you have warrants in your offering, you need to make sure you got the terms up front, including the beginning of the warrant and the end of the warrant, those key dates on the cover page of your 1A, as well as in the, you know, upfront box summary, as well as, you know, explaining all the terms very well in your plan of distribution and your description of securities. But now that I think about it, you know, if a company knows going in that, you know, it's going to be using a portal, you know, I think that I would be inclined to include that in the disclosure. So you just gave me like an idea for what I want to do for my next deal.
That's great. I mean, this is why we're doing it, so we can innovate. And
if I could add one thing on that point, and it's something that I've come to realize fairly recently, when you're setting up your deal, your Reg A deal, for example, and you're negotiating your warrant indenture, if that's something you're going to use, what I would strongly suggest to anyone considering this is ensuring that your indenture is flexible enough to allow for electronic signatures, for various forms of payment, because some of the precedents out there are still a little bit, they're a little bit strict. They're a little bit, they're more akin to the traditional way of doing things. And so I think you want to take a quick look at that, because it's often sections of an indenture that are pretty boilerplate that you wouldn't even think about to negotiate or to review. But I think it can save you a little bit of heartache down the line if you front load that work.
yeah, for sure, because then you've got to amend the warrant indenture or something, and that's a pain.
Exactly. Yeah.
We've got about 5 minutes left. Rebecca, any other types, as we're kind of innovating on the fly here, any other types of issuers that you could see benefiting from a warrant portal?
I mean, yes, I mean, I can really see that not only in the Reg A Plus context, but also, you know, in the Reg D offerings where the warrants are issued, that those Reg D offerings are also, you know, brought alive again through the warrant portal. You know, there's some issues about disclosure related to 506B versus 506C, you know, and what you can say. So we got to be mindful of insider trading, you know, if the warrant is traded, you know, what are we going to say to the security holders? You know, that's just a legal point. You know, I also see this as being just great for a warrant redemption to clean up the cap table. You know, if those redemptions are coming due, you know, maybe the redemption is pegged to, you know, a volume weighted average price over time. putting that redemption period on the warrant portal. So, and I think it really helps from an SEC standpoint as well, because, the issuer is actually given the disclosure to the investors, hey, this is your notice of redemption, and you've got 5 more days to exercise your warrant, or we're redeeming you. So I think the SEC would actually, really be in favor of using the warrant portal as a redemption notice portal as well. And then, of course, I think, potentially in the future, we might see, you might see SPAC warrants being, part of the portal. It's a sophisticated tool, the SPAC, but I do see that, the SEC is very focused on the SPAC investors getting the disclosures. So, if there's a better way to communicate, I see the electronic portal as being a good way to communicate with these SPAC investors. So those are just my thoughts on, how it could be used.
I had one thing to add there that your comment made me think of, Rebecca, is that I've been involved with warrants in the past that have had an acceleration mechanism, and often the requirement is to notify warrant holders that you're accelerating the warrants because some milestone has been met by the company. And I've seen it happen where the warrant holder just doesn't get the communication. Maybe they're not paying attention, or the method of the communication is not an effective one. And some investors can be quite upset because they missed out on the opportunity to exercise, and now their warrants are expired. And so again, a portal can be quite effective there because you're able to regularly communicate with your investors and keep them apprised of what's happening. And so it can be a tool in your shareholder management.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes back to what we were just discussing with the complexity of warrants and how you communicate that to a retail investor. Like if you use that acceleration provision and then you've got 10,000 retail investors, you're going to have a lot of upset people. That's going to be hard to manage. So that's a problem that you want to avoid right from the get-go. Rebecca, are you seeing? I haven't seen acceleration provisions. That kind of brings back memories, Damian. Are you seeing acceleration provisions on warrants?
Oh, sure. We are. It has to do with a trigger. A company event. Such a maybe there's an acceleration prior to an IPO. There could be some type of acceleration related to an acquisition of a company. So sure, they're still, pretty viable, pretty commonplace provisions. The one last tip I would say that I, meant to bring up before is just, if you're using your warrant for capital formation, there's really no need to have cashless exercise. So, I would say, of course, they can be negotiated by angels. They can, they're very typical in an investment banker warrant, but there's really no need to have the cashless provision in there. That would be an unintended consequence, is having a lot of investors come in with cashless exercise of the warrants. So that's just a pitfall and a caveat to avoid.
Yeah, so that's a good one. So recap: avoid cashless exercise. Make sure your warrant indenture is set up for digital exercise. What else have we? There's been some great tips here. I think we're going to have to play through the tape and summarize them because this is fantastic. All right, well, we're almost out of time. I want to thank everybody for attending today. This has been hugely interesting for me, and I think we've touched on a lot of topics that we're going to continue to see as we innovate in the capital markets. Rebecca and Damian, thank you so much for joining us today. And everyone in the audience, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out and we can put you in touch with the panelists.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Bye.